Before Rome ruled the world, before legions marched across Europe, before Latin-shaped law, borders, and power, China already had an empire. Not a kingdom, not a loose collection of tribes fighting over land and prestige, but an organized, bureaucratic, militarized superpower, stretching thousands of miles, governing tens of millions of people, and controlling trade routes that connected half the planet. While Europe was still divided into competing cultures and identities, China was already thinking in centuries. But history rarely tells you this, because the Han Dynasty did not just rule land. It ruled systems, it ruled information, it ruled trade, it ruled technology, it ruled identity, and most dangerously of all, it ruled continuity. Empires rise, empires fall. But the Han did not simply build power, they built something far more terrifying, a civilization that knew how to survive. When Qin Shi Huang died, China did not celebrate. It collapsed. The empire he had built through fear, discipline, and absolute control crumbled under its own weight. Rebellions erupted almost instantly. Generals turned on one another. Former allies became enemies overnight. Peasants who had been crushed under forced labor and brutal laws rose in fury. The Qin Dynasty, which had unified China for the first time in history, vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared. And for a moment, it looked as if China itself might shatter forever. History had seen this pattern many times before. A ruthless unifier rises, conquers everything, and imposes order through terror. Then he dies, and the empire collapses into chaos. Most civilizations never recover from that moment, but China was different, because something had already changed. The idea of unity had taken root. People no longer asked whether China should be one. They asked who should rule it. Out of this chaos rose a man with no royal blood, no divine ancestry, and no legendary lineage. His name was Liu Bang. He was born a peasant, worked as a minor official, and survived the collapse of an empire that devoured stronger men than him. He did not conquer through terror. He did not rule through fear, and he did not pretend to be chosen by the gods. Instead, Liu Bang understood something Qin Shi Huang never truly grasped. You cannot govern a civilization forever with violence. Fear can unify a land, but it cannot sustain it. In 202 BCE, Liu Bang declared the birth of a new dynasty, the Han Dynasty, and with it, China entered an entirely new phase of history. The Han rulers studied the mistakes of Qin with ruthless clarity. They kept the systems that worked and discarded the cruelty that destroyed them. They preserved standardized laws, unified writing, centralized administration, and imperial authority. But they replaced terror with legitimacy. They did something revolutionary. They adopted Confucianism, not as a religion, but as political technology. Confucian thought emphasized obedience to authority, loyalty to family, respect for hierarchy, and moral responsibility of rulers toward their people. Power was no longer just enforced, it was justified. The emperor was no longer merely a conqueror. He became the symbolic father of the nation, a moral center. Under this system, China stabilized, population exploded, cities expanded, agriculture flourished. While Rome relied on constant conquest to feed its empire, Han China relied on administration. They built a bureaucracy so advanced that its structure would survive for more than 2,000 years. Officials were selected not by noble birth, but by merit. Education became power. Knowledge became authority. This was not an empire of chaos. This was an empire of order. But do not mistake the Han for peaceful. This stability was protected by overwhelming strength. China's greatest threat came from the north, where nomadic horse warriors known as the Xiongnu roamed the steppe. They were fast, mobile, and deadly. They could strike border villages and vanish before traditional armies could respond. Instead of collapsing under pressure, the Han adapted. They created professional standing armies. They perfected advanced crossbow technology. They developed cavalry tactics suited to mobile warfare. They constructed frontier defenses that turned China into a fortress civilization. The Han did not simply fight wars, they learned from them. And when diplomacy failed, they crushed their enemies, not to annihilate them, but to absorb them. China did not expand by erasing others. It expanded by making them Chinese. But the true power of the Han Dynasty was not its armies. It was its reach. Because the Han did not just rule China, they connected the world. They opened what would become the most important trade network in human history, the Silk Road. Silk flowed west, gold flowed east. Ideas flowed everywhere. China traded with Central Asia, Persia, and the Roman world. Yes, Rome knew China existed. They called it Syrica, the land of silk. The Han did not need to conquer the world. The world came to them. Trade created wealth. Wealth funded armies. Armies protected trade. This self-reinforcing cycle made China unstoppable. For the first time in human history, globalization had begun, and China stood at its center. While much of the world relied on tradition and inherited knowledge, the Han invested in innovation. They invented paper, revolutionizing communication forever. They advanced metallurgy, mechanical engineering, hydraulic systems, and astronomy. Paper alone transformed governance. Knowledge could now spread cheaply. Records could be kept accurately. authority, administration could scale across vast territories. This was not accidental. The Han understood a truth that most empires never learn. Technology is power, and power, once systematized, becomes permanent. No dynasty lasts forever. Corruption eventually crept in. Court politics rotted authority from the inside. Rebellions returned, and eventually the Han Dynasty fell. But China did not, because by then China was no longer a dynasty. It was a civilization. Language endured, institutions endured, identity endured. The Han did not just rule China, they defined it. Even today, the majority of Chinese people call themselves Han Chinese. That is not coincidence. That is legacy. Before Rome, before Europe, before the modern world, China had already solved the puzzle: how to rule millions, how to fall and return. The Han Dynasty proved a truth that still shapes the world today. Power fades, systems survive, and modern China is not copying the West. It is remembering itself. And in the next chapter of this story, that civilization will fracture again. Betrayal, war, and chaos will nearly destroy everything the Han built. This is where China almost lost itself, and this is where the struggle truly begins.